something interesting is sure to happen. Well, I think you ought to tell me who you are first. Mr. Rabbit? Then why did you ask the question?
Goodness, this is quite extraordinary.
Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?
But today is turning into the most curious adventure I have ever had.
Okay, another big warm welcome to our listeners. I'm Georgia Ellis, and thank you for joining me as we dive headfirst down another rabbit hole. An exciting rabbit hole too this time. So I can't wait to get curious with our next guest. So we have Crystallin Dillon, and I'm really excited by having Crystallin here. I'm just going to read out a short amount of some of the work she does so that you as listeners can start to understand why I'm excited. So Crystallin is the founder of the Bay Area Tea Group community. And I'm not going to tell you what that is. We're going to talk about that at some point, I'm sure. And in 2 years, she's developed it into an organization that has trained over 1,000 people. Her primary values of excellence and accessibility guide her work, and she has created a variety of rich, transformative learning opportunities available to everyone, regardless of their financial status. She has facilitated group work and coached leaders in companies like Twitter, Square, LucidWorks, and Migo. And more recently, and this is where I met her and saw her in action, she was one of the key trainers at the Flow Genome Project's Coaches Training, which was a week-long intensive that we had earlier this year in 2020. So let's get curious. Welcome, Crystallin.
Thanks, Georgia. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
No worries. Now, you had an awesome bio, and I didn't read it all out, so I'm hoping we'll get to some of the things that are left out of your bio. So I've got a question that I ask all of our listeners, and I love this question, and I hope it intrigues you as you find the answer for it. So in the honor of the name of the podcast, I want you to imagine that I'm 7-year-old Alice. I'm wandering through Wonderland, and there's all these magical creatures and all these people I'm bumping into, and I'm full of curiosity, and I bump into you.
Okay.
And I look at you and I ask you a question, what are you doing here? What's your role in Wonderland, in this world that we live? What do you do? How would you answer that to a 7-year-old girl?
To a 7-year-old girl. Okay. I would say, well, you know how you feel really close to people like your mom and dad and your sister and your brother? I help people feel that connected to each other all over, so that we can all feel like we belong in our communities and on the planet.
Beautiful.
Something like that.
Absolutely. And
I've never tried to explain it to a child before, so way to put me on the spot.
That's all right. But it really makes us think about how can we simplify what it is we do and bring in the imagination and wonder of a child to get them excited about what we do, right? And your work, I think, is really important, and especially how you explained it just then. Is, we do tend to have these deep, wonderful, loving connections with those really close to us, yet we walk out the front door, we jump on the train, jump in the car, whatever it is, we get to work and we have disconnection most of the time. And, why is that? And I'm pretty sure you probably know why that is. Before we actually, do you want to answer that?
Do I want to? Well, I have lots of thoughts. It's due to lots and lots of different things, but the first thing that comes to my mind is just that it's just a function of the stage that we're in our history, where the structures that used to really hold us together aren't so much there anymore, and especially with technology. It makes us seem more connected, but it actually increases our felt sense of disconnection. And so I think just the gap between people is getting wider and wider. And so that's why I do what I do, is we need new structures structures that are wiser, right? Like we dismantled the old structures because they were kind of oppressive in some ways and didn't work so well, but we need new ones. And so I think that's why we, at least part of the reason why we experience a lot of disconnection in the world, in the modern world today.
Yeah, and I love what you said there. Like we had all these structures that didn't work, and we've evolved to a new level, yet we haven't built the structures to support that evolution. So I'm really curious about what a tea group community is. Now, I've never heard that before. I know you did a bit of a write-up, and I'm sure our write-up in your bio, which I left out deliberately, I'm sure that the listeners would be really curious when I read that out. What is tea group community?
Sure. So just quickly, Tea Group, I didn't create Tea Group. It started back in the 1940s. National Training Laboratories, NTL is the original source. But in the 2.5 years that I've been teaching it, I've just developed it and broadened it and created so many more tools that I kind of call it Tea Group 2.0, just to sort of distinguish that if you come to one of my things and then go back to ordinary, you'll be like, what is this? So, but having said that, the Tea Group community that I lead is a bunch of people that get together at least once a week, sometimes more. And we break off into small groups. We take over this yoga studio in Berkeley that's owned and operated by two of my best friends, actually. But we take over this studio every Sunday night, and because it has all these extra rooms, so we break off in these little groups. And what people do is they do this practice. It's like, you could think about it as an interpersonal meditation, a spoken interpersonal meditation. And the only thing to do is, as we're sitting in the circle, is to practice speaking whatever you're experiencing in the present moment, both just inside yourself, just in your own inner world, but then also what you're experiencing in connection with each one of your group members and in the group as a whole. And so the tools that I have added and that I've built out over the years is more guidelines and structures about how to speak in that way, because it is so different from how we're accustomed to speaking in our daily lives, even with family, right? This is like, it's definitely an odd social experiment. So I have tried to bring in structures and tools that help people do that in a good way. Definitely an exercise in transparency and honesty, vulnerability, even intimacy, if you want to call it that. And there's definitely ways to do that are more skillful and less skillful. So what I try to do is, if I'm going to invite people into that kind of space of sharing and revealing themselves, I want to give them tools to know how to do that really well. And so that's what the community does. And, the results of that kind of work is people make profound discoveries. It's very much like a laboratory or a mirror where you get to observe yourself, right? Whatever comes up in a tea group is the same stuff that comes up in all your other relationships. It's not a contrived little exercise. It doesn't mimic real life because it is real life. It's just in a microcosm of real life. So lots of discoveries and insights and a lot of like healing moments of like, oh, wow, I didn't know I was doing that. I didn't know that was running me in the way that it was. And another byproduct of it is just a deep sense of connection. Like people routinely say, how is it that I feel more connected to this group of strangers than I do to most people in my life? Right? It's because like we get to show who we really are and like have the shocking experience of like hearing what it's, or feeling what it's like when other people really reveal who they really are too. Yeah. So learning, healing, growth, connection, and then I'd even say it goes all the way to a little bit to the transcendent. Like when we really reach the further outer reaches of this practice. And this, I think, is why Jamie was interested in bringing me to the Flow Genome Project retreat, because Tea Group is a fast route to group flow, a feeling of cohesion and wholeness where the group sort of clicks into a different mode. And it's like, whoa, something else is happening here. It's like borders the transcendent. So those are just some of the things. Some of the things on the menu.
Yeah. And it was fascinating that I was there in the room when you were running these exercises. I wasn't participating. I was there as a mentor and part of the FGP team. And being a fly on the wall and just seeing some of these groups and what they were doing, I can bear witness to what you're saying in relation to the transformation, the move from fear and vulnerability to getting a sense that it's okay to share as well was really that was really evident too, which is awesome, because a lot of us have, I think, there's things we want to say to somebody, but we don't, with fear of how they will respond or react to that. So we hold a lot of things back. And you could actually see people saying things, and also people struggling to say things because we've got that old program of, if I say this, that will happen. And then seeing the connectedness towards the end, as everyone had sharing and they'd gone around quite a number of times, the connectedness in the group, you could just see the eye contact was changing. And you could actually see, I don't even know if people will sort of shun one. You could see love coming out of people's eyes, and that's the transcendence. It was really beautiful to witness that. And afterwards I had a little bit of FOMO that I didn't get to do it. So it was really great to watch. Now, one of the tools that you gave them was the Prism method. Is that something you're willing to you could share and talk to around how that works and the methodology behind that?
Totally. Yeah. So apologies for any confusion. I'm in the middle of renaming it from T Group 2.0 to Prism, which is, there was just a threshold at some point where I was like, this is its own new thing from everything that I've brought and added to it. So why not just create its own flag? And that stands for the practice of interpersonal spoken meditation, Prism. And so there's a lot of things kind of that I've pieced together to create the structure of it, but the core process is the sort of the way that we offer feedback to each other in the group. And it has 4 steps, right? And it follows what happens inside our minds, right? Because in any given moment, we're noticing things about each other, and we are telling ourselves a story about what it means. And then based on that story, we're having certain feelings, right? The feelings actually get generated by the story. If you had a different story, you'd have different feelings. And then the feelings generate impulses. And that's what we then feel compelled to do, how we feel compelled to respond. And in ordinary life, that process goes by lightning fast, right? We notice things, we tell ourselves a story, we have a feeling and an impulse, and then we just do it. And we don't have a lot of time to reflect on that or have any choice. And the thing is that at every single juncture of that process, there's a little margin of error, right? So in the noticing, what captures my attention in any social setting is going to be different from what captures yours. But we often make the assumption that we're seeing all there is to see, right? So the first little margin of error is, I have seen the whole situation, right? We don't pay attention. We don't notice what we notice. We just think it's everything. And then the story that we tell, usually instantaneous, not a very detailed story. But the margin of error there is, our stories about other people are just never true, right? Even if they're like accurate-ish, we never will know with 100% certainty what another person is thinking or feeling or intending, ever. Like there's like a kind of certainty about that. We can get close and we do a good enough job, but at the end of the day, right, we never know. And so that is the margin of error there, is we believe our own stories. And another word for that is projection, right? That the roots of that word literally mean to throw forward. So to project is we take our story and we throw it forward, and then what we perceive is that story. And so then the next step is the feeling, right? So if this process is going super fast, we don't notice noticing and we don't notice the story, but we do notice the feeling. We go, I feel this thing. But without our awareness that we noticed something and told a story about it, we're likely to say, you made me feel this, which is blame, right? That's another pitfall, is blame. And so this process asks you to notice that your feeling is actually more so arising from the story that you've told. And then once again, the impulse is arising from the feeling. And if we don't have awareness or mindfulness about that process, then impulse turns into compulsion, where you react without any choice. And that's how we, and that process is like the low level systemic inflammation that's always there in our relationships. It's just waiting to burst, right? But when we can clean those steps up and take more responsibility for it, like, I'm the one with the stories, I'm the one with the feelings, these are my impulses, right? Then we sort of become more objective to our own inner phenomena, our own inner, it's like, I think of it as inner behavior, right? It's the things we're actually doing on the inside. If we do it mindlessly, we don't create the results we want in relationship. So when we bring more mindfulness to it and take more responsibility for what we are doing internally, then we can start to make different choices and actually get the outcomes that we want ultimately.
I love that. And you had some awesome tools and questions to help guide people through that when they were noticing or hearing or noticing whatever those stories were, what they were feeling, they had the ability to articulate those. So really great set of tools and sentences.
Yep.
To
And
help
those were on
people.
the little handheld cards that people had, right? So you
Yeah.
had it in your hand and there were the 4 steps. So when you did or said this, right, I'm noticing, I made it mean, or the story I tell myself is X, Y, and Z, I feel, and then the impulse is, right? And so then you just move through that, and it's just, at first it can feel a little bit like, like riding a bike is like, pedal, whatever, it feels awkward. But once you sort of upload the skills, it starts to feel more natural and you can be a little bit more fluid with it. But that's the basic structure. And then there's also the feelings wheel. Do you remember the rainbow wheel? Yeah. So that's the other tool, which is to remember to distinguish between words that we use for emotions and words that we use for stories. Because sometimes we disguise our stories as feelings to make them seem more true than they actually are.
So can you unpack that? What do you mean by that? Because I'm sure our listeners are going, what does she mean by that?
What does she mean by that? Right. So our feelings, like if I say, I feel happy, right? That kind of a statement is one of the few kinds of statements that I can say with absolute certainty. So there's a kind of authority and a truth to it. I feel happy. It's hard to argue with that. If you did, it would even be kind of absurd. Like, how do you know better than me what I feel? You don't.
Yeah.
But if you say something like, I feel judged, I'm disguising my story that you're judging me. I'm disguising it as a feeling to make it have the ring of truth and authority that feelings would have. Judged is not a feeling. And I know that because the action of judging is not happening in my body. It's happening in your mind. Emotion refers only to what's happening in my body. Happy, sad, afraid, open, closed, excited, curious, right? These are body states that I'm describing. Judged is not happening in my body. That's happening in your mind. So if I say, I feel judged, what I've done is I've disguised my story, you are judging me, as a feeling in order to make it sound more true than it is.
Yeah. And also with that, just listening to you say that, using that judgment as an example, it's almost like I'm giving my power back to you because I feel judged. You're doing something to me. It's not really what's happening and what's bubbling up with inside myself.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So in Prism practice, you would say, when you squeeze your eyebrows together like that, the story I tell myself is that you're judging me maybe, and I feel nervous and shameful.
Yeah.
Right? That's more honest. My impulse is to hide. That's like, oh, wow. Yeah. And then receiving that is, so imagine that versus, why are you judging me? How dare you? Right? It's so different. One is like vulnerable and self-responsible, and the other is projecting and blaming and attacking. Yeah. Which one do you think is going to go better? Right?
Yeah, and which one are you actually owning and self-authoring your life with as well? So when we're blaming somebody for our emotional state, we're giving our power away.
Absolutely.
And I don't think many people understand that the power actually lies within you and the stories you're telling yourself.
Yep.
And who gets to change the story?
Isn't that great? We do.
We do. Absolutely. So with the work you do, and I'm loving that whole process. I actually have got the handouts and I brought them back with me because I really loved the process around that. that's really open, honest conversations.
Mm-hmm.
So you've mentioned that you've worked with organizations. How has this been transferring into organizations for better communication? And this is a twofold question. And do you find that people stick with using this methodology once you leave, and do you get feedback around that?
Yeah. So my work in organizations has been by invitation only. Thus far, it was not it's just something I said yes to. So there's just a handful of test cases so far. But what I see is that it is somehow even scarier for people at work to do this practice than it is out in the community where I'm doing it with folks who self-select to be there. There's just more at stake. You have to continue living and working with these people every single day. So like there's even more of a membrane to push through than there ordinarily is. But what I see over and over again is, that almost sets them up for an even more profound shift. Like you were noticing it at the retreat, that by the end of the group, people's bodies were different. They were breathing, they were looking each other in the eye. Everything about their physical and verbal expression had shifted. And that's what I see in organizations too. And so just really profound shifts in people's physical, emotional, and mental state. And especially feeling connected to their coworkers as humans, right? Out fully outside of our roles and outside of our, even outside of our stories about each other. And when folks, what I really love so much is that moment where someone goes, "Oh, that's what you feel?" That moment of like, my story was so wrong, or I had no idea that that's what was actually going on for you. Right. And so what that does, for the whole group, it wakes up that awareness, right? And so we just become more human to each other. I think that's what I see.
Yeah, it really does.
And that definitely, and that sticks. It's like it's definitely a meditation practice in that it's something that gets better with, it's a cumulative practice, but even one taste of that, like you can't go back from that moment of like, oh, that's what's really happening over there. Like that leaves a mark. Yeah.
Yeah. That big aha moment, that emotional impact of, oh, I got it wrong.
Yes.
Yeah. And I want to touch on, I do and I don't want to touch on this, but there's a lot of turmoil and craziness in the world at the moment.
Yes.
Right. So this is being recorded. What's the date today? The 20th of March, 2020. And there's a lot going on out there in the world. Is this a tool that people could use without a conversation with another person, but with helping them to, I guess, discern and gain clarity with what's going on in the world outside? So we're getting bombarded with information.
Right.
Could this tool be adapted to help me really make sense of the world?
Yeah. Well, I just, I had done a few online tea groups and they had all gone really well, but I thought it might be a fluke. But I decided to give it another shot. And the moment I put up a whole bunch of them, they filled up immediately. So I put up a whole other bunch of them and they filled up immediately. And then I created a bunch of 4-week cohorts and those filled up immediately. And what I'm seeing is that I'm seeing people do exactly what you were talking about. So, but Prism, Tea Group, whatever we want to call it, is not a time to come together and have a discussion about facts. It's really about a time to be with whatever is so right now, and what we're feeling and what we're experiencing in our connections right now. And of course, the pandemic and the crisis and that's coming into the present moment. It's part of the present moment. And the thing is this isn't like a tsunami where everybody gets wet. Like this is a very different kind of thing where it's going to impact all of us differently. And so to come together, what I'm seeing is like, people are like, oh, it's like that for you. Oh, it's like that for you. And they're seeing where it's similar and where it's different. And I think it's helping people orient to like, oh, this is the collective experience we're having together. And here's how mine fits into and is similar to and different from yours, but we're in it together. And so there is a certain kind of orienting and grounding that can happen. And even just knowing I'm not alone and feeling what I'm feeling.
Yeah. I was also thinking with, if I'm somebody on my own, I don't have a group to join. And I'm just going to grab, I've got the questions here. This is an experiment. We're conducting a live experiment right now. So let's say I'm at home on my own, I'm watching the news, and instead of we could use that feedback process and say, when I see that information on the news about X, Y, and Z, the story I tell myself, or I make that mean, fill in the blank, I make that mean that I'm whatever, and I feel whatever I'm feeling inside, and my impulse is to deny, stock my pantry, do nothing. And it might actually help people start to unpack why they're feeling the end results and what story they're telling themselves about the information. So even if I don't have someone else to talk to, do you believe it might be beneficial for someone to have those steps at home to help them filter through the stories they're creating with all the news that they're receiving?
Totally. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So whether it's Prism or regular old good old fashioned meditation, like they have one goal in common, which is to create, or not necessarily create, but show us how to find the part of our mind that can witness the rest of our mind. Right? Most of the time we are kind of absorbed in and identified with the thoughts and the stories, but it's actually possible to like kind of disembed from that and then look at them from a more objective place. And we can, Eckhart Tolle comes to mind. He's one of my favorites. And he very simply says, you are not your mind. Your mind is a constantly evolving kaleidoscope of stories and perceptions and images and sounds and whatnot. And when we're like really attached to that and identified with it, and especially when we really believe it. And Byron Katie's great on this one. Like she's like, just don't believe in your mind. It's not for believing, it's for just watching. Right. And so both of those two teachers and the whole Buddhist meditative tradition points us to, there is like a mountaintop in your own mind that you can go to, and you can watch the clouds swirling around beneath you, and you can recognize that you are not them and that they are not the complete truth about anything. And that gives you the capacity to not be so hooked by the feelings that they want to generate. Just the reality, or just the movement of being a little bit more objective and not quite so identified, it lessens their power to kick up lots of sensation and emotion in the body, and you can find a greater sense of peace. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the work I've done and some of the rabbit holes I've been down is around the stages of consciousness, adult development,
Right. Yep, you
things
got it.
like that. And as we start to evolve our awareness and consciousness, we get to a point where it's almost like an instantaneous move. We can take ourselves from the bottom of the mountain to the top of the mountain really quite quickly. And I think if we start to develop those tools, and I believe that Prism what those questions that we ask ourselves will help us see the stories we're creating. It takes us out of the situation of sitting on the couch watching the news or sitting on our phone scrolling, taking ourselves back and looking at what stories we're actually telling ourselves to create that feeling on the inside. And it becomes a superpower for moving from, I think, anxiety over to creation, and I've got this.
Yep. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%. I could not agree more. Actually, let me just, because you reminded me of a quote that I have right here on the other screen. The superpower that we get to, I like to think of it as grace, but it's sort of like a kind of profound non-reactivity. And so Eckhart Tolle puts it this way. He says, non-reaction to the ego in others is one of the most effective ways, not only of going beyond ego in yourself, but also of dissolving the collective human ego. But you can only be in a state of non-reaction if you can recognize someone's behavior as coming from the ego, as being an expression of the collective human dysfunction. When you realize it's not personal, there's no longer a compulsion to react as if it were. By not reacting to the ego, you will often be able to bring out the sanity in others. At times, you may have to take practical steps to protect yourself from deeply unconscious people, but this you can do without making them into enemies. Your greatest protection, however, is being conscious. Somebody becomes an enemy only if you personalize the unconsciousness that is ego, right? It's kind of wordy, and he applies it just to the situation of one human being and another. But what he's pointing at is that if you're like a marionette puppet on the strings of your own thoughts and feelings, that's not a very empowered place to be. So this non-reactivity is I choose my response in every moment. And that's the point of most power, not only in relationship, but in life, I think.
Yeah. I think our superpower is choice.
Yes.
That ability to choose how we're going to either react or respond. So reacting is actually not responding. Reacting is just letting the stories rule, while responding is what you're saying there. It's that taking that choice, that step backwards, going up to the mountain and having a bird's eye view of what's going on. And you can only do that through self-reflection, and really being open to what bubbles up as well. Yeah. So the tools you have are amazing. I'm going to rewind because I'd love to know how you got into this field. What was the journey that brought you here? So for people that are going, who is this woman? How did she get into this? Because the work you do is amazing. What led you to this? What was the path that got you to be doing this amazing and transformative work?
Well, let's see. I have to go back to about 19 years old when I had a pretty unexpected sort of spiritual experience that really altered the course of my life. I transferred from Brandeis University, where I had been studying biochemistry, to Naropa University, where I was studying Buddhist psychology. So like a very big pivot. So I wound up getting bachelor's and master's degrees in Buddhist psychology, and I became a therapist. And so that was like kind of the meditative background. And Naropa, excuse me, was very experiential. We were our own test subjects. And so we were doing a bunch of group work together. Sorry. And so that was kind of like the seed of it. I already had the deep background in training in meditation and mindfulness, and I already had experienced some profoundly transformative community. And I got to see how transformation in community is something totally different from just an individual on their cushion or in a therapy office. And then when I graduated with my master's in 2012, I discovered the Boulder Tea Group community, and they'd been going for years. So I was like, oh my gosh, how come it took me so long to find my way here? But I was there every Sunday for like 2.5 years. And it was just an arena of such profound transformation for me. It was like I took everything I'd gotten from school, and outside of the context where I needed to get a grade or perform or whatever, it was just an arena where I could practice and play. And so much of my sort of glitchy personality just got to like unwind, right? And that happened through the power, as Brene Brown says, of vulnerability. It's like I just took the risk to be who I actually was and say what I was actually feeling, and be received and be able to belong as who I was. Like that was really powerful for me. And then I just started voraciously like observing myself. Like meditation gave me the ability to observe myself. But then Tea Group was a place where I got to apply it to like life and watch how I showed up. How do I show up with women I feel intimidated by? How do I show up with men I feel attracted to? How do I show up with older men that I feel afraid of? How do I show up with women that I just kind of judge and don't like, right? This is where the rubber meets the road. And I got to see everything. But as Byron Katie points out, whatever you think you see on someone else is yourself. So everything I was seeing on these other people was like I was bringing home little bits of me, and I just couldn't get enough of it. So then I moved here to the Bay Area, and I had no intention of turning it into a business. I had no idea what was in store for me. I just wrote like 3 paragraphs from the bottom of my heart about why I loved this practice, and I sent it to like the 20 Facebook friends I had in the Bay at that time, and then 40 people crammed into my living room, and it's been like that ever since.
Wow. Amazing. Awesome story. And I'd love to I'd love to unpack a little bit more around how this process has helped you with those relationships, turn up and be in front of the, potentially a male that you wanted to have a relationship with, or a female, or a male that you're feeling intimidated by. So how did all of this practice help you in practicality? So for our listeners, they're thinking, this all sounds great. And yeah, I heard you say that. And I have people I feel intimidated by, and I'd love to know how I can move through that. So can you unpack some of that for us?
Yeah. So like, how did I do that? Or how does that work?
Yeah. So how did the process and everything, how did it help you, give you more of that confidence, I guess is what happened. You now feel like you can be in front of those people that either intimidated you or whatever it might have been. So what were the tools that you used to be able to do that? How did that unfold?
Well, at the T group community in Boulder, they use the original form of T group. And so it really was, I sometimes call it the Wild West of personal development, because it really is just a radical self-revelation, radical revealing of oneself. So what I did was I just said the truth. I just said exactly what I felt.
Can I just interrupt, to the person?
Yes, to the person. Yes, okay. I would say it to their face. And, but I always tried to come from this place of like, look, I recognize this is my own brain doing something. I'm doing my best not to put this onto you, but by having a moment to share this with you and bring it to light, and then to be able to hear about the impact that has on you and hear your response, it's like I actually got to touch reality instead of being just locked in my own stories and reactions all the time. And I found so often that, that even if I was saying something like, I feel intimidated by you, or, oh man, okay. So I actually, a woman who became one of my best friends of all time, one of the first things I ever said to her was, I noticed that you are just like really extremely beautiful, and I feel diminished in your presence. And there's a part of me that would really love to watch you be publicly humiliated. And she smiled so big, and she was like, I like you. And we became really good friends, right? But what I was exploring with her was just the radical reality that women are programmed to compare ourselves to one another. And that if my brain is saying I'm less than her, then right on the heels of that is going to be another part of me that says, well, I would love to see her taken down a peg or two. Right. But somehow naming these things in that kind of space, it's sort of like when you bring it to light and you give it a name, it loses its power. And once again, it's like it becomes the thing I'm looking at rather than the thing that's running me. And that just happened over and over again, just by telling the truth. And this is not something I would necessarily say to take out into your life and just suddenly be radically honest with everybody. I would not say that that's necessarily a skill.
No, I was going to actually ask you that, because I think,
but you can do it inside your own head with yourself. And that's one of the cool things is I can do a T group in my own head with myself out in the world. It's like, oh, look at this funny thing that's coming up between me and this man or this woman or this individual. And at this point, I have seen all of the things. There actually aren't that many programs in there to begin with. I'm familiar with all of the things. And so I can just sort of watch and laugh as they come up. And sometimes they still get me, for sure. But
it's like an onion, isn't it? We go back to Shrek. It's like the onion. We just start peeling those layers away. So for people that are listening, and I'm thinking here about, okay, what I witnessed and listening to you now, something that you were just saying was you had an opportunity to express how you were feeling. And this happens in I'm going to say the safety or in the net of the T group, the small group of people that you're working with, which is really profound. And I've seen it happen. The beauty is, what I witnessed is, if I'm sharing how I feel, being vulnerable and going through those steps, then you have an opportunity then to respond with what I've said.
Yep.
And there's a lot of power in that for both individuals.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Do you recall the beautiful lady that's now your friend, a woman that's now your friend?
Yeah.
Besides laughing, did she
Mm-hmm.
give you a verbal response? And I might have been a long time ago, but can you recall vaguely what it might have been?
Yeah, I think it was something along the lines of like, um, I'm just delighted. I'm so satisfied hearing you say that. Um, mm, as in, what she meant by that was hard to say. That was ballsy. I now believe that you will tell me the truth in our relationship. That's what I really want. And so I feel so open to you and so trusting of you. Like you're naming something rather than being unconsciously run by it. And that's badass. And I want to be your friend now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So for people that do it in their head, okay,
Mm-hmm.
so they might meet you and be totally intimidated by your beauty, your intelligence, and your success. They don't say it verbally to you because they don't know you.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be, could you walk them through how they would do that in their head?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see. Huh. Well, I guess that's kind of like the fruit of getting it to be able to practice it in the arena first, because it's harder to do it in the privacy of your own head. That's the beauty of putting it into words. It like physicalizes it. It turns it into these little blocks that you can move around through space. Whereas if it's in your head, it's a little harder to grab onto. Um, but if you can witness the the feeling in your body and then work your way backward, like what story would I have to tell myself in order to feel what I feel right now? Hmm. And then naming it to yourself, actually using that voice in your head, not the voice out loud, but using the voice in your head to actually say the story to yourself. Sometimes I do that. Like, what's an example of that? Like in the privacy of my own head, I might say to myself, oh, the story is that she doesn't like me very much at all. Huh. And then the moment I like put it through the language part of the brain, something lets go, right? It puts it into a different part of the brain. It becomes more, um, it becomes subject now to the more like conscious parts of my brain, right?
More
Like it's
cognitive,
something they can look at and manipulate rather than something that's like rattling around in the ancient basement of my brain. It like literally routes it through the language part and then deposits it up here where I have a lot more choice about it. That's
yeah,
what it feels like anyhow.
yeah,
So I'll just
beautiful.
say the story to myself and and then I'll just like use like pretty basic somatic techniques for dealing with the feeling, which is just like going limp and allowing it to just really be there. Like, oh, look at that, like it, like a flame, like I just let it flame through my body without like, don't tighten, like don't clamp down on it. Like that's a really great way to intensify it. Just like woof, you just like let it rush through your body like a lightning bolt or like a flame, and that's what actually lets it resolve, and then your body returns to a calm state a lot faster if you just let it happen. So I guess that's one way of saying what I do.
Yeah,
I
beautiful.
hadn't put that into words like that before, so I hope that was clear.
It was clear to me, so we'll see how the listeners go. And what I'm hearing there is around that release phase is really important, that surrender and release, and
Yeah.
just releasing into whatever the feeling is so that it can dissipate.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I've come to know that happens is that when we're in that, because you mentioned the tense body, so I'm with somebody, they're making me feel this, whatever it is, of a lesser person or embarrassed or intimidated, and we get tight and we get tense. When we're in that state, we don't have the ability to create. So that letting things go and being really loose with it puts us into that calmer state. When we're calmer, we can then really get creative around a solution around that and really see the stories that we're creating for ourselves. And while you were talking there, I think there could even be a really beautiful process of journaling through the process after an event.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm going to read out, I'll read these out. So for anyone listening, grab a pen and paper, and you could do this after you've had an event, and potentially go quiet place or at home that night and just go back and reflect on it and say to yourself, when whoever that person was, when they told me that my work wasn't good enough, let's say.
Being really specific about what it was.
Yeah, be very specific. All right, I'm going to read it out and you're going to fill in the blanks here. You're going to help us get more specific. Okay, so first question. When you or we get really specific about the situation. Okay. Step 2, the story I tell myself or I make it mean. So what would someone write there?
That's where they would say, like, how did your brain in a split second interpret what you saw, right? If what you saw was that someone's body posture just shifted, right? We'll never actually know what that body posture shift actually meant, but your brain made an interpretation because it can't not. Like, the brain exists to make meaning. It can't not. It's like if you're an English speaking person and you look at an English billboard, you can't not read it if you look at it, right? And it's the same way with these stories. So her body posture shifted. How did your brain interpret that? Oh, she's, and this is a skill. It's like reaching back into the darkness of our unconscious mind and fishing around, but then pulling it back out. And the way you'll know that you did is that is the story that would generate the feeling I just had. If they don't go together, then you're not there yet. So you can reverse engineer. If you start with your feeling, I feel rage. Okay. What do I have to tell myself in order to get there?
Yeah, beautiful. So then the third step after that is I feel, and you put in the actual emotion and feeling that you have. And if you need to, you can start there as well.
Yes.
And then the fourth one is my impulse is to. So if we're writing this down, we might go, my impulse was to. And so what would go in that space?
Yeah, well, the impulses that I see all the time in Prism practice are, I have an impulse to clarify or explain myself. I have an impulse to reassure you, or I have an impulse to fix the problem or your feelings. I have an impulse to protect you or myself. But out in life, it might sound a bit more like I have an impulse to shut down. I have an impulse to poke at that spot I know is really tender in you. I have an impulse to fight back. I have an impulse to emotionally withdraw or punish you in some way, right? So this is looking at what would the sort of reflexive reaction be if you were not able to interrupt it.
Yeah, beautiful. Because I think that's a really nice, simple process to potentially help you unpack some of the stories and why you're doing the stories and what those reactions are. And as you said before, we reach back into the unconscious mind, and our brain is constantly just searching the environment, and the environmental signals trigger stored emotional reactions.
Absolutely.
So all of those emotional reactions are coming up in those feelings. So the environment's triggering it. So we have the ability to notice that feeling and what's been triggered, and most importantly, the story we've created about that.
Yes.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. And then when we can come into a relationship and say something like, even if you skip out all the first 3 steps and just say like, wow, I have such a strong impulse right now to criticize you for X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
That is different from actually criticizing them for X, Y, and Z, right? And so that is what mindfulness in connection and communication can really look like. We can kind of do it on the fly. Because once again, it's so different to name a thing rather than to do the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. Now, you mentioned earlier when we started off that you have been launching some online Prism / T group. We're in transition, so we'll call it
We're
both.
in transition. It's still T group on the web.
So if people want to join one of your groups, now this predominantly our listeners are in Australia, but we do have quite a number in the UK and US and to Asia as well. So if they wanted to join, how do they get hold of you? Where would be the best place to find out where you're holding these?
Yeah, it's all through my website, crystallindillon.com. And on the main menu, you'll see online sessions, which are just one-off 2.5-hour sessions that are always with me and only 5 other participants. And then there's 4-week cohorts, which is the same, 5 participants plus me, but we meet with the same people week after week for 4 weeks, bit of a deeper dive. And then the Sunday night community is everybody that's been practicing with me here in Berkeley and the Bay Area. We get together, and then the folks who've already been practicing, like they go off into their own like organic, leaderless, or like collectively led groups. And on the Sunday nights, I hang back and I facilitate for the folks who are there for the first time. But after you've been through a facilitation with me, either at the Sunday night or in one of the other sessions, then you can join the rest of the community and see what it's like to like be in the real Wild West, where there's no, where it's kind of just all of us co-creating an experience together.
And it's such beautiful, transformative work. I've witnessed it, and I highly recommend if you jump on board, if this is intriguing you, because it's tools you can use in your relationships, it's tools you can use intimate relationships, tools you can use with your wider family, tools you can use at work, and even potentially a little bit of self with the journaling side. Potentially you can sort of transform it slightly to be able to do that. So as we finish up, I'd love to hear from you. Do you have any advice or final thoughts or recommendations for our listeners based on not just the work you do, but anything that you're experiencing right now? Any final words for the crew who are on board today?
Let's see. Well, there was one just sort of like trailing thought when you mentioned the journaling practice. I think that for people working on their own who don't really have access to the practice that I'm teaching, the book Loving What Is by Byron Katie, and her process that she calls the work, is a way to do almost exactly the same thing, but with yourself. Yeah. And that book is top 3 most powerfully transformative books I've ever read in my personal life. And so I would suggest that for the listeners for sure.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute delight. The work, as I said, I keep saying it, the work you do is transformative, and I'm so glad we got to have a conversation. We didn't get much of a chance when we actually met, and it was as the event was finishing up, I said, Crystallin, I need to speak to you. I'd love to get you on my podcast. It was almost like it was the last day. I think you were actually leaving. So thank you so much for making the time. So glad to have you here, and thank you for doing the work that you're doing, and helping people to really build deeper connections, because I think that's what the world needs now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. My pleasure. And thank you so much for having me. It was so fun to connect with you over all these things. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Today is turning into the most curious adventure I've ever had.